China warns the United States against forming Indo-Pacific NATO. The Chinese leadership's decision to side with Russia came long before Putin ordered troops across the lines into Ukrainian-held territory. Officials in Beijing sympathize with Moscow's grievances against the West because they perceive a similar U.S.-led containment effort happening around them. From China's perspective, a contested land border with India, as well as maritime and territorial disputes with half a dozen neighbors, are just about manageable. Beijing already has enough on its plate without a persistent NATO presence in the region, and it would very much like to keep it that way. Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, said, "China has not been and will not be a rival to NATO. The military bloc should adhere to its original geographic positioning," essentially saying, stay the fuck out of our zone. I said that word. There was a forum hosted by Beijing's Tsinghua University on Saturday, and Wang's number 2, Lei Yucheng, said it's deeply distressing that the flames of war have been reignited on the European continent. More importantly, it should prompt us to profoundly reflect the root cause lies in this Cold War mentality and power politics. The Ukraine crisis provides a mirror for us to observe the situation in the Asia-Pacific. We cannot but ask, how can we prevent a crisis like this from happening? The crisis in Ukraine is a stern warning. He went on to condemn America's engagement in Asia and said that if they were allowed to go unchecked, it would bring unimaginable consequences and ultimately push the Asia-Pacific into an abyss. Apparently, directly following the event, Chinese military's official newspaper printed an editorial titled, quote, "Ganging Up to Disrupt Regional Peace and Stability," looking at America's contemptible role on the international stage. That paper went on to say, "Here, I would like to advise the United States not to cling to Cold War mentality and ideological prejudices. Some self-reflection as soon as possible would be a wise move, or else it will suffer a shameful failure." Under Xi Jinping, China has been increasingly willing to take geopolitical risk that it has not in the past decades, such as clashing with India in the Himalayas, militarizing the islands, which I mentioned earlier this week in the South China Sea, and challenging the post-war regional order anchored by more than 7 decades of American engagement. Perhaps we should start keeping our nose a little cleaner, but alas. War. Moderna is seeking to have regulatory approval for the COVID shot for very young children. Moderna said it will ask regulators to authorize its COVID-19 vaccine in children younger than 6 years old based on data showing it generated a similar immune response to adults in its clinical trial. Moderna's vaccine could be the first authorized shot for children under the age of 5 in the United States, and many parents of young children have been waiting on a vaccine. They have? Pfizer is authorized for use in 5 and older, but their trial results for 2 to 4-year-olds showed a weaker immune response than in adults, forcing the trial to be extended to test a 3rd dose. Results are expected in April. Moderna chief executive Stefan Bancel said, "Given the need for a vaccine against COVID-19 in infants and young children, we are working with the FDA and regulators globally to submit these data as soon as possible." A top scientist at Moderna told Reuters that the company was a couple weeks away from filing for authorization for the age group in the United States, Europe, and elsewhere. It's not clear how many U.S. parents will vaccinate their children in this age group. Only 27% of 5 to 11-year-olds in the country are fully vaccinated, and COVID is generally more mild in children than adults. Moderna said the shots, spaced 4 weeks apart, were generally well tolerated in the age group, and the majority of the side effects experienced were mild or moderate, U.S. regulators have asked the company for more safety data, and the FDA also said it needed additional time to evaluate the risk of myocarditis after vaccination in the age group. If you have a child under the age of 5, I am curious if you are willing to give this to your child. I will refrain from giving my opinion because I prefer to keep my show and I don't want to be accused of mis or disinformation, but I do want to hear your thoughts though. Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian will soon stop counting medical debt in credit reports. Now for the bad news. The agency said the removal will result in nearly 70% of the medical debt on America's credit reports. This is a case where less is more for the financial lives of many consumers, certainly during the pandemic, advocates say, but they note that the people who will remain stuck with medical debt on their reports are likely going to be those who were already the most financially vulnerable. Beginning in July, they will stop including medical debts that were in collections before being paid. It will also take a year, no longer 6 months, before a medical debt collection is reflected on a person's credit report. Some 43 million Americans have an estimated $88 billion in medical debt on their credit files. The Wall Street Journal first reported the changes from the 3 credit bureaus. This announcement is an effort to help households recover and move on from the pandemic. I'm curious if you know anything about this, if this will help your family. There is also a caveat that the debt has to be below a certain dollar amount, a certain dollar threshold. I think it was like either $500 or $600. I can't remember, to be 100% honest with you, but and I don't know if that's total debt or if that's each individual debt. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. I'm curious, again, to hear your all's thoughts on whether or not this will help your family, especially with interest rates rising. Qualifying for loans is going to be more difficult. Perhaps this will be a trade-off for that. So, okay. I didn't talk about many subjects today because I'm spending a little bit of extra time on this one because it's something that's kind of near and dear to my heart. So, fewer Americans are hunting. Now, a lot of this is the perspective of the person who wrote the article, so I want to be really transparent about that. Fewer Americans are hunting, and that raises hard questions about funding conservation through gun sales. For every firearm and bullet produced or imported into the United States, an excise tax dedicated to wildlife conservation and restoration is applied. In 1998, these taxes generated about $247 million in inflation-adjusted apportionments to state fish and wildlife agencies from the federal U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. By 2018, these revenues had more than tripled to $829 million. These taxes on guns and ammunition sales provide a growing share of budgets for state fish and game agencies. As scholars of environmental politics, conservation, and wildlife management, that the growth in conservation funding driven by exploding gun sales presents at least 3 critical moral and ethical issues. Number 1, the original argument for using gun taxes to fund conservation was that most gun users were hunters who used lands and wildlife and should help to support those resources. But their research shows that gun use is increasingly unrelated to hunting. Number 2, the recent spike in gun sales is linked to violence and social unrest. Even if most gun owners never commit a crime, this means that overall, conservation is benefiting from gun-related social strife and harm. Number 3, recent changes to the law allow the use of gun-related excise taxes to support activities with little or no connection to hunting, wildlife, or outdoor recreation. At the end of the 19th century, many wild species across the United States were threatened by overhunting and unregulated markets for wild game products. hats, women's hats, feathers, things like that. I think they put a bird out of like it went extinct because the feathers were so coveted for hats. In an effort to restore game populations for sport hunters, federal and state governments established fish and wildlife agencies. Those offices, though, were often underfunded. In 1937, the Federal Aid and Wildlife Restoration Act was passed. This is also known as the Pittman-Robertson Act. It increased conservation funding by redirecting an already existing excise tax on firearms to a dedicated wildlife management fund. Over time, the law expanded to include excise taxes on long guns, handguns, ammunition, and archery equipment. To access these funds, states must use fees from hunting licenses exclusively to support fish and wildlife agencies. Since the early 2000s, however, gun and ammunition sales have begun to disconnect from hunting. Nationally, the number of hunters declined from 17 million in 1982 all the way down to 11.5 million in 2016. In that same year, Gallup estimated, insert laughter, 93 million Americans owned guns. These numbers suggest that only about 1 in 8 gun owners hunted in 2016. This pattern echoes a 2015 analysis that found that 80% of firearms were for non-hunting activities like sport shooting, gun collecting, and self-defense. This article likes to continually state, quote, although most guns sold in the U.S. will never be involved in violent crimes, and then go on to say, but some guns commit some deaths, and that means conservation efforts are tainted with blood money. Gun manufacturers and sportsman groups endorsed a set of reforms in 2020. These changes allow state and federal agencies to use funds to promote recreational shooting and purchase land for shooting ranges. Other groups have proposed ways to make wildlife conservation less dependent on guns through more taxes, like a backpack tax on equipment used for outdoor activities like hiking and birding. The outdoor industry, however, has opposed this proposal, arguing that it's impossible to discern the actual use of outdoor products and that such taxes may create more barriers for low-income individuals to participate in outdoor activities. It's really interesting to me that they say that tax may prevent individuals from participating, but applying a tax to a weapon that you purchase or applying a tax to a weapon that you want to carry concealed, and you have to go apply for a permit for that process. That's a constitutional violation because you're forcing people to pay an additional amount of money to the government to exercise their right to defend themselves. And so that impacts lower income individuals. Not to mention the tax stamps that you have to pay for from the ATF if you want something that they deem to be regulated with the NFA. But I digress. Only certain low income individuals are okay. If you're bird watching, that is an acceptable defense against taxes. If you are exercising your right to defend yourself, tax away, tax away. And I mean, here's a really good solution. Let's just print all of our guns and we don't have to worry about any of that anymore, right? I'm going to drop a video right here for you to see the new and exclusive soda pop delivery device that has been created with 3D printing. And I have to say, I'm incredibly excited about it. So enjoy these couple little clips and then on to the next subject. Allegedly, Russia's main argument for invading Ukraine is that they vehemently oppose Ukraine joining the NATO ranks. Since the killing started in the entire country, President Zelensky's main argument was a plea to NATO to accept his country as part of them. But so much chaos and destruction has apparently made him rethink his strategy. It seems that Russia's intentions are finally becoming the better solution for everybody. As Zelensky gets ready to speak directly to NATO on Wednesday, new information just emerged about a statement he made that he's willing to negotiate with Russia in order to bring peace with the country, or to his country. However, his agreement won't come with other demands to President Putin. Should they meet in person and negotiate, Zelensky finally realized that he will not be able to join NATO. Doing so would definitely start World War III, and he doesn't want that to happen with the rest of the world. In his willingness to reject NATO, Zelensky also confirmed he won't stop pursuing the most obvious and urgent demands for Ukraine. If he gives up on the country joining NATO, Ukraine would also demand a complete ceasefire from Russian forces and also a complete withdrawal from his territory. President Putin would have to sit down and analyze this possible proposal because he doesn't just want to prevent Ukraine from joining NATO. He has other intentions as well. For example, the independence given to the Donbass region. So this is interesting just because I think I'm going to make a tinfoil hat observation. It feels very much like not everyone wants this war to end. And so this meeting and this conversation might we might see a prevention of this happening by people who would like for this situation to continue. So keep your eyes on all of this. I will be very interested to see how things shake out over the course of the next couple of days. With that being said, this is your edition of Everything Yesterday This Morning. I hope you enjoyed it today. It's a little bit different from my normal, but things are crazy. My kids are on spring break, so I'm not going into the office. It's just been nuts. But I love you guys. And if you like, share, subscribe, comment in the thread. YouTube really likes that when people are engaged. They push the video out more. So, I mean, like, even if it's just to be like, Heather, shut the fuck up. That's okay too. All right. I love you guys. Take care. Have a great day.